Welcome to the Journey 2020. I'm Charles Morris. Happy to be here with you coming off the weekend. And like always, I always say, like my old co host used to say, the journey is from me to you and from you to me so we can reach a higher level. And so the journey, we've been around since 2013. And, we talk about some serious stuff and then we talk about some not so serious. And I'm Charles Morris, and originally from Jacksonville, Florida. Been here for a very long time. Born, in Florida, so went to school in Boston and a couple other places. And I came here a long time ago, and not knowing that I would end up living here for my period of time, and have made a lot of friends over the years. And it is so funny because once you reach this stage of life, you kind of try to put some pieces in place. But life is always evolving, and you're always learning, and you learn that it's always changing. And there's just when you think you got a niche on something, life goes to show you, nah, no, 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 that's not how it is. But the person that I am blessed to have on the show today, she doesn't know it, but I talk about her all the time and have been for a very long time. Um, it's so funny how life works. And I can remember being at the office at Orange TV, and I don't know how the connection got to be that she was there. Maybe she can tell us. I don't know how, but walked in, saw her sitting behind the desk, and we started talking. And she started talking about what she was doing. And it was funny too because I sent her, even though I had to email her today, but I still use the old email address that she used to have from back in the day because I sent them to both. And the old email, the AOL, is not working anymore. It came back. It says it's not working, so we're gonna talk about that. But anyway, um, we she had one of the most, I think, powerful programs. There's two programs that I have worked with that I think that is probably one of the probably most powerful. Hers and another gentleman that I work with called Young Fathers of Central Florida. And Young Fathers of Central Florida, he's been on the show numerous times talking about working with young fathers as young as 12 years old on up to about the age of 25, 26, because they are a forgotten people because of their status. They don't work. They've been known not to vote, so nobody cares about them. And this is the main time in which that spirit comes in and do what it does to make sure that they go out into the world and become something that they're being locked up. They're 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 being criticized. They're because of the undiscipline and because of the nurturing that is being missed at that time, and it goes, on and on and on. Now I'm babbling on, but I want to try to set this up because Sherry Grace, and I want her. She said, Charles, what are we going to talk about? We got to start off with the whole idea and the concept of how mothers of incarcerated sons came to be. And then the thing of it is that I was watching the news, and just the other day, the gentleman who was sexually abusing the gym, the gymnastics girls, he was stabbed. And then when they showed the prison, I'm like, that's Coleman Prison. Had no idea that he was there at Coleman Prison. And I was like, because of Sherry, I can't tell you how many times that we visited Coleman Prison for the work that she was doing. So I'm going to have to bring her in. I talked long enough. So I say, Sherry, welcome to the Journey 2020. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. I'm glad to be here. It's good to be with you again, Charles.
Yeah. Um, I kind of didn't give you any justice at all, not even a little bit.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start off because we have so much to talk about, and I told you that you you can come on this show and have your own like either the second week or the third week or whatever week you want to come on, because you have so much to share and people need to hear your story and the things that you're involved in, and you probably can help motivate some of us to take part in some of the things that you're doing. But I first want to
Mm.
start off. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Sherry Grace and who Sherry Grace is and where Sherry is from? You know what? I have no idea where you're from.
You don't know where I'm from?
Wait a minute. I'm trying to remember if you told me.
Well, wow. I was born in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Compton.
Oh,
Compton is my home.
wow. Wow.
That's
Wow.
where I was born. My mother died when I was 4,
Okay.
and my father moved us to a suburb of Pomona, which is an orange, well, oh gosh, I forget what county Pomona was in, but Pomona was between Los Angeles and San Bernardino, California.
Mm-hmm.
And my father raised me, and when I was 12, 13, I thought I was just all of that, getting into trouble. And my father decided, I'm going to send you to the South to a
Okay.
black boarding school and get you straight. So at
Okay.
14, my father shipped me off to Huntsville, Alabama, to a Seventh day Adventist college campus
Wait a minute. Hold on. Wait
where
a
I
minute. Wait a
went
minute.
to
Wait
high
a minute.
school,
You went from California to Alabama?
to Alabama. At
Boy,
14,
that had to be like a shock.
it was. I went there with my little mini skirt and my hoop earrings, and I was going to a Seventh day Adventist college actually that had a dormitory and a high school campus, and it was the best thing my father could have done for my life. And it was there that he was so right that the things that our parents instill in us, um, I could understand all of it while I was there. And that's where I gave my heart to the Lord, and it changed my life. It's where I met my husband of 50 years married and 3 years courting at Oakwood College, which is now Oakwood University, an amazing black school.
Mm.
Uh, yep, and that is where I started. That's
Wow.
where I began to understand the power of leadership and service to God and to our communities.
Right,
Mm.
right, and I was so sorry to hear about your husband, about you losing your husband, and I knew how. I mean, I knew that you guys. I didn't know how many years, but I know you was married for at least 40. So you say you was married for,
It
huh?
was actually 49 years and 6 months. I kept saying, honey, hang on, he's 50, but his body was tired and the
Right.
Lord let him rest. But
Mm,
yeah,
mm.
we dated 3 years. I met my husband, I was 14 when I met my husband.
Wow.
14. So he's been my whole life. So the last 20 months has been quite a journey.
Mm.
Quite a journey.
Wow. So you was with your husband for 52 years
All
then.
my life.
All
Yeah,
of your life. All of your life.
pretty
Wow.
much.
Wow. Wow. Boy. Woo. That sounds like a book.
Mm. Yeah,
Mm.
there's a lot in that book. Yeah, but
Well,
I am continued to be blessed by my husband's love. You begin to understand that when the Lord says you become one,
mhm.
that it's not just a statement a or a wedding. It The Lord literally brings you into one body,
Okay.
and you realize it when that other part is gone,
Okay.
and it's like, wow, you
Well,
you begin to function with half of yourself. That's how I
right.
have felt, that I am functioning not whole, but there's a half of me that is resting and is buried,
Well,
but for God.
right. But see, now you just gave me another show topic with you.
Mm.
And what you just said about the body and becoming one, okay? So I want you to put in your notes that Sherry is going to come back on the show
Mm.
and we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to
Mm.
talk from the angle of where we are today, how we look at ourselves and relationships, and how you view it and your understanding of it and the lack of what you see, and give your I guess personal own experience of a body of one. How does that sound?
Mm. Okay. Whatever you say.
No, but
Whatever God wants.
no, but I I think it's so much needed because that's
Yeah.
what it's supposed to be. But
Mm.
that's a different show. That's a different show. We're gonna talk about that.
That,
See.
that's really, yeah, that's really what it is. It's just that many of us walk away from it. And that's not to say that there are times when it's necessary. I have best friends that are divorced,
Hmm.
and it was the right decision for their lives.
Yeah, yeah.
So I honor and respect that too.
Well,
For me,
well, that's
God chose for us
right,
to.
right. But that's not what. Well, okay, we're gonna get on something else here, but
Okay,
I no
we'll
no no
do
no
that
no no
later.
no 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 no. I will say this right here. I think, and see, I can have this conversation with you, and see, that's what I like about it.
Mm,
See, I don't have to sit here and go like this right here, and sure you don't know what I'm talking about because generally the conversation is going to be spiritual, so I can have that conversation. I really appreciate that. You have no idea. So
mm,
I say that from the standpoint that we start out and we don't ask God uh, about this
mm,
about this journey we about to take. We don't pray on it. We don't fast on it, and we kind of step into something that He didn't necessarily meant for it to be together in the first place. And so
mm,
and I don't mean that it can't work. That's not what I
mhm.
mean.
I know what you're saying.
Right, right, right. But I'm saying if we put God in it from the beginning, I think things are a little different. That's what I'm.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to say. But okay, mothers of incarcerated sons, you got
Ooh,
to, yes, you got to tell us about that great program that you had for I don't know how many years, but it was awesome. So tell us how that came to be and all the wonderful lives that you touched.
mm. Well, Charles, what I'm realizing even now, right now in my life, even more, is that God uses us in the most powerful ways. He uses us. We don't do anything in our pain. I feel that right now. I feel so empowered, and there's been so much pain. But when we surrender that pain to God, He uses it. He really does. And I'm so grateful. But at that time, having four children, my husband was a dentist. Everybody thinks we're a perfect family. Here's Dr. and Mrs. Grace, perfect family. And what they didn't know is we were like everybody else. That we'll talk about that on that marriage show. We didn't have a perfect marriage. Um, when it was collapsing many times, it was God who held that up. And in a marriage, and we'll talk about that, I guess, later, but a marriage, many times you're not holding on to each other, but if you're both holding on to God at the top where He brings it together, it's He that holds it, He pulls it together. Um, but in the crisis of our home and some dysfunctions, our two oldest sons ended up into drugs and all kinds of crazy stuff, and they were brought up. All of our kids went to church schools. I was in every PTA meeting. I was a room mother for all four of my kids, so much that my kids were begging me, Mom, please don't go on the field trip. Please let us just go on a field trip without you. Um, but somehow, our two oldest sons ended up into drugs. My oldest son selling drugs. The Avery, my son, who now is 48 and mentally challenge. She's been in a state hospital for 20 years. That's another show, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
In this moment, and I'm all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
but in this moment right now, after 20 years of being in a secured facility, we were hoping to bring him out where he'd have a little more freedom. And he's been in another facility for the last 2 weeks where I could go visit him and take him off and do some things with him. And he was just Baker acted last night,
Mm-hmm.
which means he now is in a crisis center and they will decide whether or not he, in fact, will need to go back to the state hospital because he just can't survive out here with the freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, going back, so the boys were had started that journey of trouble, and I think sometimes our black sons,
Mm-hmm.
if they grow up sometimes in a middle class home,
Mm-hmm.
they feel like they have to prove themselves to the rest of their friends or community. Like my
Mm-hmm.
sons didn't want me on field trips, but the truth was he didn't know that their friends would have loved their parents to be on the field trips. But my sons, were seeing it from another point of view. I don't know. Sometimes I think there's peer pressure. I don't know what happened with them, but I think they felt they had to prove their manhood, and they felt that the way to do that, I think, was where they ended up.
But
But
Sherry,
anyway,
Sherry, can I want to let you finish? But you got to also understand that with where you are, who you are, and how you want to be seen and understood, you know you're going to be under serious attack. You know that
about,
spiritually. The-
oh yeah,
yeah,
oh
right.
yeah.
But I'm going to let you finish. Go ahead.
Well, anyway, they ended up in just the height of, I can't even explain. We always went to church. We go to Mount Sinai Seventh Day Adventist Church. We've been in that church for, gosh, oh, 40 years, 35 years, as long as we've been here. They were raised in the church, they went to the schools. And in the middle of that, I was also the director of women's ministry for our church. And our church at that time had about 1,000 members. And I was doing women's ministry. My sons were being arrested. I would be at women's ministry and we would be doing programs, and I would come home. And in the middle of the night, I may have the police bursting through our house looking for my sons, or
Mm,
my sons on the front grass being wrestled with police, and the police telling me don't open the door, and hearing my sons screaming. I mean, we did that for many years.
wow.
Um, but God is good because my son, one of them, almost went to prison, but he didn't. They always got house arrest. They served some time in jail, and there's so much. We're just touching the just skimming.
Mm-hmm.
But in the midst of all of that, I would in Orlando, where our church was on Orange Center Boulevard, I would go there with women's ministry. But there was a place between Sanford Jail and Orlando Church where I would stop crying. If I were at the jail visiting both sons, sometimes I had both sons in jail. I would leave the jail, and right about Lake Ivanhoe, coming on I-4, I would dry my tears so I could go to women's ministry and, be there and be a support to the women of the church. And one day I was at the jail, and in those days, and that was a long time ago, but in those days, they didn't have seats. When you were at the jail and families came in to see their loved ones, there was nowhere to sit. And I remember being there one day, and I saw elderly women sitting on the floor and children running around, and mothers, and waiting to see their children that were in jail, or waiting to put money on their cards, and watching it. It's like the Lord said, I want you to look around, and I want you to share with them who I am. And while you're doing that, I'm going to take care of those boys. And so one Mother's Day, May 8th, I think 2001, you may know better than um, I decided I'm going to have a beautiful Mother's Day celebration for women who have sons in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So I rented the Westmont Community Center, and this was all on God's direction. I didn't know what I was doing. I just said I'm going to have a party. So I rented the Westmont Civic Center, and I think that's when I may have met you because
Mm-hmm.
there were some friends that I knew that had shows, and they said, Sherry, you can come on the show and talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got on all the TV shows and on the radio and said, any woman who has a son in prison, I want you to come Mother's Day. And I just want you to come and let us just care and love you. And so I went there and I had flowers and candies and all kinds of stuff. I didn't know what I was doing really. And put chairs in a big circle in that conference center and put a table in the middle with candles.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know who would come.
Right.
And then the rest is kind of history. Women came, lawyers came, pastors came. I think people were curious of what is she doing, and that place was filled.
Right.
And that day, all I did was tell the story and pass the mic. That's all I did that day.
Right.
And everybody in that room stood up and had a story about someone they loved in prison. From the lawyers to the pastors to the mamas to men who'd been in prison and had been released. It was a very powerful day. And from that, the Lord said, this is what I want you to do.
Mm.
And we went from there. I started going to libraries once a month. I would move around to different libraries and just put it out there that we're going to have a meeting for mothers who have sons in prison. And when women started showing up and telling their stories, then the Lord said, you can't help them unless you go and find their sons. And
Mm.
with the Lord's direction, I learned how to call prisons and talk to wardens and classification officers, and mothers of incarcerated sons happened. And as mothers would come on board, we'd find out where their sons were. I would make the calls, find their sons, and start communicating with the wardens, the classification officers, and the men. I began writing to the men, and it just blossomed.
See, and it's funny because I don't know how you met Wharton Carlisle and him, but
Warden Holder.
hold
I've
on,
just talked to him recently. I've just talked to him recently.
all
Yeah.
right, but I'm gonna let you tell that story. Um, because of you and working with you, I got to go to Coleman Prison. So that so I'm like, okay. Now I had previously um, worked with Al Reddick on one of his projects, and we went to a prison, and I interviewed a young man, which is a different story. But that was my first time going to a prison to do an interview. Was working with Al Reddick, and
Mhm.
so now, and I don't know how we did this or how in reference to you and I, and you were saying we're because when I went with you the first time, because you have to get the clearance, they have to get your information and all this other stuff, and you had our whole TV department there. My manager was there. He had to get clearance. We had to bring the crew in. But I went back with you several. I don't know how many times I went to Coleman Prison with
Yeah,
you,
you did.
and right, and I got to know the guys there, and they knew you, and it was a great experience. Now
Yeah,
the
it was
first yeah.
beautiful.
Now the first time I went and they closed those doors and you hear that
Yeah.
clink 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 clink, clink clink, and you hear that sound and that like okay okay okay, but just the idea that I'm at Coleman Federal State Prison, and I don't mean it the way that it sounds. I meant,
Actually, it's the largest prison in this country. It's the largest penitentiary in the world.
and
Yeah.
Um, so we won't talk about the Yes program yet, but I'm going to let you finish talking about how it all evolved. I'm sorry, I
Well, you
cut you.
say it's funny how you talk about when you went in the first time with the doors because I didn't tell you that at the same time I was actually doing two things. I had an interior design business where
Mm-hmm.
I was doing decorating and I was modeling.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I was doing all kinds of things.
Okay.
And so for me to end up in the prison
Mm-hmm.
was only God, only
Right.
God would do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time that I knew I had to go to a prison because now I'm writing men all over the place because mothers now are coming on board and for us to care for them, we have to say we are going to care for your son. So when a mother come on board, I'd call whatever prison, introduce myself and say that let's say Charles Morse is now a part of our organization, Mothers of Incarcerated Sons.
Mm-hmm.
So if Charles does something,
Mm-hmm.
if he ends up in lockdown,
Mm-hmm.
whatever happens with him, I really want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I would do is I would write to Charles
Mm-hmm.
and say, Charles, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
And then I would see that the classification officers would be accountable. I said, if I can reach them and get them to change what they're doing, will you commit to us that you will be accountable and that you will see that they get out of lockdown, that you'll see that when you see the changes that you'll honor them. It was
Mm.
kind of our way of trying to protect them, to let them know that there's an organization watching
Right.
and these men in this prison are part of our organization and we're watching.
Right. Okay.
So, but anyway, when I ended up going in the prison the first time, I think they started inviting me to come and speak.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I went to speak to the men, I mean, I had been modeling, I was doing interior design, I was doing church work, I'm doing room mama stuff. And here I am in this prison by myself. And I remember the first time they have these steel doors. They have a steel door. When you go through that, it locks.
Right.
And when it locks, the only other steel door that opens is the one going out on the yard.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And when I went and that door locked behind me for
Mm-hmm.
just a moment, I'm like, oh God, where am I? And I just felt like he was saying, are you going to do this for me or not?
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, I said, yes, Lord. And that other steel door opened. I never looked back. And
Mm-hmm.
when I walked out there, it was just me and a security guard. And I walked out, and there were probably 100, 200 men out playing ball. And we had to walk to the chapel. We had to walk quite a way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all those men, and it was me and a security guard.
Mm.
I never felt afraid. It was like I was at home
Mm.
because those men were like my sons, and God just filled me with this love for them like my sons. And I remember that first time when I stood in front of them, and that place was packed in with men,
Mm-hmm.
most of them black,
Mm-hmm.
which really helped me to understand truth that I won't even get into. But I
Wow.
looked at these men, and for them, I think it was shocking for them because I'm kind of, they're looking, and it was funny because I was a little younger, and they're like, "What is she doing here?"
Right. Mm-hmm.
And we kind of laughed. I said, "Guys, go ahead and do your thing. Go ahead and laugh, and whatever they have to do, woo woo, all that kind of stuff." I go and I really did. I said, go ahead. And I said, but now that if you're done, we're here together and we're here together because God brought us together. And the one other thing the Lord told me to do that first time is when you go in, they put this whatever a button on you.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's an emergency, you hit the button. If you feel threatened, you hit the button.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing the Lord told me to do when I stood before that group of men was I took that thing off and I
Mm-hmm.
showed it to him. And I said, I'm going to take this and put this over here because I don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
Because God loves you and He sent me in here to tell you so.
Wow.
And he just talked to those men. I felt like just his vessel. And I watched those men weep. You know, men don't weep in prison. You better not.
Right.
But they sat and wept, and I wept. We wept together. And I was baptized that day. And we went 10 years, 10 years, 10 years in an amazing way. We ended up, gosh, in over 100, and I can't remember prisons. I don't know how it grew. Susan Taylor got involved with
Oh,
Essence Magazine.
yeah,
I
yeah,
took
yeah,
Susan in, she
yeah.
went nuts and started doing articles in Essence Magazine every year. And we ended up with prisons between Jamaica and Alaska.
Wow.
We had that many men writing and us connecting with their prisons and their families, and we began to have a national women's call, and women could call from all over the country. We did that once a month, and we had our support group grew from North Lane. We had a support group at North Lane at the drug center every month. It grew nationally. And we started doing it by phone, and mothers could call in all over the country. And that went on, oh, 10 years, most powerful 10 years of my life. I met the most amazing men in my life in prison. Some of them will never come out.
Right.
Some of them innocent, some of them guilty. But when a man or woman who's been in prison transforms their life and gives it to God, there is no one else that you can trust more than them. And so then what we started doing is when men were coming out because we had relationships with them, we started talking to corporations and different companies and asking them if they would trust us to screen those men and would they just hire one. And we started getting companies to say, okay, we trust you. And if you send them to us, we'll give them a chance. And so we started doing the employment thing. And we did it for years until my husband started getting sick and I really needed to go to work and get paid.
Mm-hmm.
That was the hardest thing of my life. I couldn't find anybody to take it,
Mm-hmm.
to do it. And I had to let it go. I didn't think I could ever let go of mothers of incarcerated sons.
Mm-hmm.
But it was necessary. And where did the Lord take me? He took me in a hospital, which now I kind of do the same thing in the hospital with employees, care for them and love them. And I'm so blessed to be able to do that and be loved by them. But I will tell you a beautiful story. I was at a McDonald's one day, a couple of years ago. I was at a McDonald's and I wanted an ice cream cone.
Mm-hmm.
And the gentleman, he looked at me, he said, "Is your name, are you Mrs. Grace?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "Oh my goodness, do you remember me? I was, I forget his name now." He said, "But I used to be at Coleman and I used to be in the play." Remember, they used to do plays. He said, "I used to be the drummer in the play." And he said, "I am the manager of this McDonald's." And I'm
Wow.
like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so proud of you." That was just a few years ago.
Right.
So I know that love, it just makes a difference. It makes a difference for me. It makes a
Wow.
difference for other people. And when God can fill us with love and we can share it with each other, it's not a one-way road. It's a beautiful thing. Those men loved me well in a sacred, beautiful way. And I got the privilege to do the same, along with my mother and other mothers who had sons in prison started becoming a part of it. And so everybody's loving everybody. Mothers who had sons in prison were going to prisons, even where their sons weren't, to care for other men.
Mm-hmm.
Men were coming out of prison and we were bringing them into the support group with the mothers who had sons in prison. So men coming out of prison are with mothers who have sons in prison, and everybody is just supporting each other, and it was a beautiful journey. I'm
Wow.
very grateful for it.
Wow. Well, you know you're leaving a lot out, right? You know you're leaving a lot
Yeah,
out.
we don't have time. We don't have time for it all.
Yeah, yeah. But how did you make that connection with the warden? How did that happen? Because he was such a blessing,
Yeah,
like in so many
when
ways.
well, what started happening, and I'm telling you, it was like Noah's Ark. Noah never seen a ark. He
Right.
never seen rain. The Lord had to really literally tell him, and that's really what he did with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that when I know the Lord was saying, you've got to adopt the sons. And so that's when I started calling different prisons and saying who I was, and that they had a man in prison that was now a part of our organization. And when I got to Coleman, I asked for the warden.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got him on the phone, I said, "Can I come out and introduce myself?" And he said yes. And when I went out there, we just did this because he was a godly man. And he treated those men, as you know, like his sons.
Mm-hmm.
Those men in prison had a warden who loved them because he loved the Lord. And so we did so many programs together. So Coleman just became my other home. I was as comfortable being there as I was being home with my family. It was a beautiful experience, and there were so many wonderful programs. Warden Holder had those men learning languages, graduating with degrees, having services and ceremonies. He was transforming their lives with the love of the Lord. And so it was a privilege to be able to work with him those 10 years. We did some wonderful things with God and you that recorded it all.
Okay. Well, listen, I got a little. Uh, I have a little something for you. Take it.
Okay.
Okay. Here.
What you are about to see is a dramatic reenactment of real life situations. However, the portrayers are not actors. They are real people who made choices.
Gotta tell you something. What's that? We got a world about here. I'm the FBI. No, man, you tripping. Get up. Oh, get up. Listen, man, I ain't got to be no daddy's boy, man. You ain't got to keep calling me that just because I don't want to get high and get drunk and have it going. Because I don't steal cars, man. Ain't nobody trying to. I'm trying to finish school. I want to be something. I want to be something. But you saying we ain't something? Man, show us what you got, man. Show us how you get it like that. They trying to get you to go out and commit crimes, man. Those are not friends. Friends should encourage you to work hard, man, and be patient for what you get, man. I understand. Go out for that fast money, you're gonna end up dead or in jail, man.
Mm.
You have been found guilty of 2 counts of conspiracy. And after reviewing your record, I see that you started making bad choices at an early age. And it requires me to sentence you to a term of 20 years without parole.
20 years?
There are over 2 million men and women incarcerated in the United States. 60% of children who have one or more parents in prison are also likely to commit crimes. What can be done to break this cycle of incarceration?
Okay.
Mm. Oh
It-
my gosh.
right. And so that.
Those were my brothers.
Yeah, and that
Those were
goes
my
back to
brothers.
the play that you were talking about that the gentleman was speaking of.
Yes,
And I
yes,
and I have actually shown some of those plays on the show,
yes.
right?
And you have to let people understand that those were men in prison who wrote those plays, wrote the
Hmm.
music for those plays, and acted those plays out
Right,
to transform other prisoners' lives, to
right.
make decisions, to make choices that were right. And the men in prison did it all in an amazing way.
Okay, so let me
Yeah.
help people better understand something so you can talk about the warden and how and why the Yes program was so important. Part of what was going on at the time was that um, they were bringing these young teenagers or young people in, and they were at a
Mhm.
point where they was trying to get them to understand, okay, we're we're gonna help you try to make uh, have a better understanding of
Better
your
decision.
right, right. And so, what these plays were for was for the young people, these young men coming in, these young teenagers coming in, and then they would there was at that time I knew they had three plays that they had written and produced for themselves, and I think
Hmm.
by the end it was four, but whatever one that they would choose out of the three, they would come in at about 10 o'clock that morning, and then
Hmm.
by the time the play was over, it was time to have lunch. So they would, you would sit down and you would have the prison lunch with the and the teenagers that they brought in. They would sit
They were
down.
from like boys' camps. They were
Right,
troubled teenagers.
right,
Yes.
right, right. And so they would sit, and then they would kind of have like the one-on-ones with these kids.
Yes, they would set up a inmate with a student,
Right, right.
and they would do one-on-one. And those students,
Mm-hmm.
those teenagers
Mm-hmm.
were confiding in these
Right.
inmates.
And
And I
yeah,
remember there was this,
no,
yeah, go ahead.
no, 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 no. Go ahead. No.
th- there was a situation where actually one teenager, I think, was going to either kill himself or do something. And it was because he shared it with his inmate, the one he had been paired with, that saved his life. Because that inmate was able to talk to him and actually share, with those that brought them in so that they could do some, counseling and caring for that young person. It was
Well,
an amazing program.
yeah. Well, I heard that story. I remember that story. But in addition to that, I heard more than one, more than two, more than three say that because of the conversation that they had, that one a few of the kids had planned on doing some stuff like hurting somebody, and because
Yes,
yes,
yes.
and because of the conversation, now they had a different way of thinking, different way of looking, a different way of feeling about the situation, a different outlook, a different outcome. So
From
all
those plays.
right,
Plays did steer them straight.
right, and now what a lot of people don't know about this and all this that's going on in the prison. And now, Sherry, what you didn't know was this right here: the 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 men could not come out of the prison, but the women could. So the women would go around and they would speak. They would bring them into churches or schools, and
We
so
had, well, they had the women had a choir, so we started bringing them out with
right,
permission to sing,
right.
like in the churches and stuff, and that was powerful for the women in prison too. That was beautiful.
Right, but one of the gentlemen that I work with, Stanley Murray, um, he's a pastor, but he's also Orange County sheriff. We brought them to Oak Ridge High School,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually have the videotape because I videotaped it. There
Mm-hmm.
were about maybe 10 to 12 female
Mm-hmm.
inmates, and what they did was they brought all of the females, all of the girls at Oak Ridge High School to the gym.
Wow.
Okay. And then when they were walking in, the the female inmates were standing there in their, prison uniforms. And
That's
then
right.
as they was walking through, a lot of the kids were just sitting there teasing them and saying certain things and, blah, 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 blah. Okay. When they went in, when they got up and spoke, Sherry, you had so many of them in there with tears in their eyes.
Mhm. Yeah, it's transforming.
Right.
Yeah.
When they finished, they gave them a standing ovation.
Hmm.
And it was so powerful with what they had to tell them and how they was telling you this could be you because they told their stories. They told them about their relationships. They talked about how they had never been in trouble. They talked about how,
That's,
so, and
and
they,
many of them were not guilty of anything but being with
right,
with the wrong guy at the
right,
wrong time.
right,
Yeah.
at the wrong place at the wrong time. And so when they finished, they wanted to hug him and da, 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 and
Yeah.
it was amazing, okay,
Yes.
because they even had a couple of grandmothers up in there.
That's right. Yeah, there. I remember there was one mother and daughter serving time together.
Right,
I remember that. Yeah.
right, and she was telling her story, and her main story was, I'm in here cause of my son.
Hmm.
Following, dealing with her son, and so that's a. But I just wanted to to acknowledge, because the warden, his spirit is just so great. I mean,
He was
how
a
many?
godly man. He still is.
Oh,
As a
yeah,
matter of fact, he does a reunion every year
I know.
of men and women who've come out. And well, I think yes, you were at one of those
Right?
reunions.
Yeah. Hmm.
Even that's a powerful, powerful story because when they're on the outside now, when they have the reunions, they come and share the businesses they've established and the things that they're doing in the community, and it's just amazing.
Right.
Yeah, he does a whole weekend. They
Really.
do workshops on finance, on business, on planning. They have a service, they have a barbecue. It's a great
Hmm.
weekend, and they do that every year. So
Right.
anyone who would like to experience that, or any men or women who've come out of prison who'd like to experience that you should have them get in touch with you, and we can add them to the list for warden holder.
Okay. But Sherry, let me ask you something. Now we've had this conversation, and I know, and I've seen you do what you do, and I've been to a few of your events. But oh, by the way, Sherry used to come to my martial arts class as well.
Yes, I did.
Right.
My husband said, I don't want you in martial arts getting all bruised up. But I did. I'll tell you what's funny about that. When I
Okay.
did those classes, one day, this was years ago, but when I did classes with you,
Mm.
one day I came home and you all had taught me how to flip a man. You had taught us how to flip a rope. So my son was like, 15, but he's tall. I'm like, oh, Edmund, let me show you what I learned. And I didn't think I could really do it. And so I got in position and I really did it. And he's on the floor like, Ma. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that. But that was really neat.
Now, and one of the other things is that I know you used to have was it a red motorcycle?
I still have it.
Oh, okay. So you still have the red motorcycle.
Yeah, I
Y-
still have it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see, we were supposed to go motorcycle riding maybe about
I
15
know.
years ago. I actually just took mine out because I hadn't ridden it for a while. I took it out about 3 or 4 days ago. Um,
Yeah.
so see, but people wouldn't know that you ride motorcycles, take martial arts, and
Oh,
all this
yeah.
other stuff. You know,
Yeah.
you know. But I want
Yeah.
to ask you, yeah, when you look back 20 years ago
Mhm.
and you look at Sherry Grace now, how do you see yourself from like 2001 to where we are now when you look back on the whole mothers of incarcerated sons,
Mhm.
when you tell the story of going into the prison, all the things that you have done, the lives you have touched. You were in McDonald's, and the gentleman now says, I just showed you the play that he was talking about. That he was
That's
saying,
right.
right, and now he says he's the manager of that McDonald's. How does Sherry
Mhm.
Grace look at herself now? Even though, as you speak of the journey of dealing with, as you talked about, hearing the sounds of your sons in the front yard being arrested, um, the whole thing of your son over the last 20 years, losing your husband, so on and so forth. But the journey of life itself, and you look, it's a, it's, it's, it's life. It's life. How do you? look back on and see Sherry now? Who is Sherry now?
Mm. Um, it's all the same, you know. For me, I know. See, I get emotional.
It's okay. It's okay.
I have always known, the Lord has always told me that my purpose on this earth, long time ago, was to just love for Him. You know, just love people, and it's never mattered where it was. It didn't matter if I was in the prison or I used to model. I would be in this in the models' dressing room, waiting to go on the shows we used to do. And it was there God told me, "You're not here for the modeling. You're here to minister to these women." And so we would be in the dressing rooms waiting to go on the TV shows, and I would just start talking about God's love, and we would be in there. We would talk so much about that when the producer would come out and tell one of us to go on, nobody wanted to leave because we were talking about love and the Lord and that kind of thing. So it hasn't changed. I now do it in a hospital. It's the same story of gratitude. Gratitude and what God is teaching me continues even now is that if we don't suffer great pain, we cannot appreciate the greatest of blessings. You know, if if everything's just perfect all the time, then you just, you know, you're grateful. If you love the Lord, you're like, wow, Lord, thank you. But if I have a son who's been locked up 20 years and he gets to come closer to home where I can actually go and get him anytime I want and bring him home, for me, that is huge. I don't need I don't need God to heal him. You know, many times we want everything to be the way we want it. We want it the way we want it. We want it perfect. And life isn't that for any of us. But to have the privilege to be able to suffer pain and then appreciate God and His miracles and feel gratitude and love for me is for me it's still bigger than life for me. I'm so grateful for the journey. um, I don't need it to be perfect. I've learned it's not perfect. My son, it looks like, is not going to be healed. He will always be mentally challenged. It looks like he may be in a state institution his lifetime. It may be. But even today, I said, Lord, though I be slayed, and I don't believe it's by God. I don't say, though you slay me. I think God doesn't slay us, He loves us. And whatever we suffer would be so much worse if He were not there. But though I be slayed, I will serve you. And the privilege to love and be loved, to have a son who was had a record so so long and never go to prison and actually be in a corporate setting where he makes six figures is God's grace. You know, to have my children, my daughter's husband now has cancer. They have two little ones. To see God healing him is God's grace. None of us about Sherry Grace. It's the journey of all of our lives. And I'm reading a book that actually we had in our hospital, Advent Health, that I work for. I work with their chaplains department and mission and ministry, caring for employees as they care for me. But one of our themes in one of our spiritual weeks of prayer was the land between. Powerful book and a powerful thing. And it's pretty much talking about the Israelites and when they left and were going to the promised land. They were in that land between for 40 years. We're all in the land between. We're all coming from something terrible that's painful. And we all have the opportunity for something greater with God. But we're in the land between. And there was a sentence in that book that just I'll never forget. And it says, we have two choices. We can die in the desert with pity, with being a victim, with depression. And sometimes that can't be controlled without help. Or we can make a decision to trust God and to be used by Him. And I'm like, Lord, I'm not dying in that desert. I'm not. I want you to use me. And so I feel like the same little girl from 2000 and whatever that was, one. It's in a different place, it's with different people. It's the same story of pain, of growth, of love, of caring, and God. And so I feel so blessed, um, so blessed, so much gratitude, and for the opportunity to care for people, to listen to their stories. Everybody has a story, and every story matters. To learn from those stories and be mentored by those stories, and to be a vessel for God in my imperfection. And trust me, I'm a mess. That's the other amazing thing, that God can use us, and we're all a mess. We're all a mess. None of us are perfect. We're a mess. But God says, "I'll take that mess if you'll just be available." So that's where I am. I am available, and no matter what, I am determined to continue to be that for God. And it's a wonderful place to be. He carries us when it hurts, when we suffer pain. We all do, will continue to. But when He carries us in His love, you can't help but share it with others and be grateful for it.
Well, one of the things that just popped in my mind is that I got another book for you.
Another book.
Yeah, another book. You know what the book is called?
Hmm.
I'm a Mess.
I am a mess, but
That
I'm God's mess.
there you go. See, that should be the title of your book. And do you know how many people would be able? I'm serious. I'm serious. That's what I'm saying. That should be the title of your book, because people can relate. Because you said it. We're all a mess. All of us.
Yeah, well,
And so I think uh, well, that's another that's another show.
that's another show. We've got a lot of shows.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's just so much, in it, because um one of the things that, let's see, I'm gonna kind of close with this, but I'm gonna kind of go off topic for a minute, but I'm not. Okay. So one of the things that I try to convey when I'm talking to a lot, because over the years I've had conversation with a lot of my female friends, and we talk about either their husband, themselves, or their relationships. And so, by the way, for a period of some time, I worked with a counselor. The gentleman that came up with this show, and I used to do the show with, he's a clinical psychologist, and one of his therapists out of the office. We know each other pretty well, and she asked me to be on her Zoom call on Friday nights, where she is counseling some of her patients, and so she asked me to come and talk with nothing but women. So it's like, oh God. And every time I would, yeah, every time I would ask some guys to come join me, they look at me like I'm crazy. Even some of the pastors be like, oh, "You ain't dragging me into that."
We're not so bad. Women are.
Whew. Anyway, but one of the things, now, see, I got to bring it back because I want to make it short. One of the things that I said to them, Sherry, was this right here. I said, when Adam and Eve was in the garden, and Adam had a choice to make, and not to get into it, but he had a choice, and he could have gone with God, but he stayed with that woman, right? And so,
That woman
well, no, that was because he
is
said, "Look, no, no,
Daniel,
listen, listen, no,
his
listen,
fault.
no, but it's true. It's either I can go with God, or I can stay with that woman because that's exactly what it is, right?
Is that what it is?
No, but I'm saying, what I was trying to say to them that they couldn't hear, and I said it like that for a reason, Sherry. I said it like that for a reason, and it's this right here. They couldn't hear and process what was being said, and I'm saying, knowing what I know, there's there's God, and then you got the woman. There's God, and there's a woman. He went with the woman, and my point that they missed, Sherry, was the inability to understand what God put in him for the woman. That just went
Put
right over
in who for the woman?
what God put in the man, Adam.
Okay,
I mean, are you understanding what I'm saying now? There,
okay.
there's God, there's that
Hmm.
woman.
Hmm.
If it's me, I think I'm going with God. But I'm saying they miss, didn't phase, didn't think, didn't talk about it, didn't question what God put in me for the woman. To I'm gonna, no matter what, even when God, I'm gonna be with her. And so what I'm saying is this right here. When you don't operate in that spirit in which He gave me for us to deal with each other, which you have been talking about the entire time you've been on this show, the world gives you what it is. But when you operate in it and you're able to tap into it, and this is what I
Hmm.
try to say to him, Sherry, and this is what I really been trying to say. If your husband, I'm speaking in general, if your husband or your wife are talking about, whom I am the wife talking about my husband. I'm the husband talking about the wife. And 35 minutes into the conversation, explaining who my wife is, blah, blah, and I haven't said one word about who she is in Christ, what does that tell you about how you being seen by your significant other? And what does that say about the
Hmm.
relationship? Because I guarantee you, if I'm talking about Sherry Grace, 3 minutes is not going by before I say something about who you are as a person in Christ.
Hmm.
Are you understanding what I'm saying?
Yeah, people, though people, everybody has a story. Every everybody has a story, and so many of us function from brokenness and hurt and fear of being vulnerable, fear of being transparent, and fear of loving because so many have been hurt by that love.
Mhm.
And so, whatever a conversation is, it's important to hear their story
Oh yeah,
in their words. And
right.
they're not telling their story, but if you listen to their words, you can kind of understand their story.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Well, I want to say that we have more stories to tell, and we're gonna call it the Sherry Grace Hour.
uh, the, uh,
Yes.
the vessel of the Lord hour. Just a little a broken vessel. You know that story about vessels. They say that when a vase, a ceramic vase, if it is not broken, there's no way to put a light in there and get light.
Mm-hmm.
If that ceramic vase is perfect, has no cracks, you can put the candle in there all you want and there is no light.
Mm-hmm.
It is only when that vessel is broken, when that vase is cracked and broken, you get light. And the more cracked it is, the
Mm-hmm.
more light reflects. And so we're just broken vessels reflecting God's light.
And
That's
that it
what we are.
and that it
That's what I want to. In the brokenness, just Lord, reflect your light and your love.
there you go. Well, thank you so very much for coming on the show. I really,
Thank you.
I mean, and then, like I said, an open invitation for any time because we have so much to talk about. I have so many questions, and the one thing that I do enjoy is that I can talk to you and feel good about it because of the
Oh,
topics that we can have. And you would be great on that Friday night because what we tried to do was that we was trying to help, and there was different age group because there was some as young as age maybe about like 20, and there was some in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 50s, as well in their 60s. But it was a array of her clientele who are dealing with certain things in their lives, and when you
mm.
when you hear the stories, just like life, I would always say in it, it's amazing. It's amazing the things that we have to come up out of, and still, as you talk about what you're having to constantly come up out of, and nothing like God, grace, and His mercy. As you,
Nothing like it.
all right. So,
It's always there for us.
all right. Well,
Mm.
Sherry Grace, who
Mm.
we talked about briefly, somewhat about mothers of incarcerated sons. A great program. I say there's two programs, and that I say when people are doing stuff, they're not helping people; they're helping generations. And that's when you know
Mm.
you're being effective. When you're not only helping a person, you're helping a generation, and that's when you know that you're doing some of God's work. And I don't know how else to say thank you so much for your kind spirit and
Mm.
your willingness to make the sacrifices that you've been making for so long. Right.
Mm.
Um,
I'm grateful.
all right. Well.
I'm blessed and thankful to the Lord.
All right. All right. For questions, comments, and concerns, you can always even you may have a question or for something for Sherry. Um, you can always email me, and I'll make sure that she gets the message. And as you know, we come to you every Monday at 7 p.m. And for questions, comments, or concerns, you can always hit us up with an email. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube. And as I always say, the word comes by hearing, or I should say, the faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of the Lord. I'm Charles Morris. Enjoy the rest of your week.